What's up, everyone? I want to talk to you about a book I read here last year, Clash of Civilizations and the Remaking of World Order by Samuel P. Huntington. He wrote this in the 90s. He made some, I guess, predictions or whatever that were pretty accurate. We'll get into that. But he's basically discussing geopolitical stuff and comparing the post Cold War order, describing it and how it would play out versus the Cold War. So let's go ahead and jump on into this. So Huntington was a professor at Harvard and then at Columbia. He was also a consultant for United States government. He passed in '08. Now, the Clash of Civilizations and Remaking of World Order was based on an essay that he wrote for Foreign Affairs back in '93, and the book itself came out in '96. And like I said, he discusses the post Cold War world order. So let's jump in here and take a look at what the Cold War era order was all about. So, geopolitics during the Cold War was ideologically based, nations mostly aligned due to geopolitical philosophies, economic and political systems, right? So, you had the free world, NATO countries, United States, Great Britain, uh, Canada, Australia, etc. And then you had the communist bloc, which was the Soviet Union and their allies, a lot of Eastern European nations, Cuba amongst them. And then there were some also unaligned nations. You had the two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, in competition. Now, they never went to a hot war against one another, but they did wage proxy wars, such as Korea, Vietnam, the conflict in Central America, and when Soviets invaded Afghanistan. Now, those of us that lived through the Cold War are familiar with the term mutual assured destruction, which was a kind of a insane insurance policy that nuclear Armageddon wouldn't happen. Each side wanted to spread their philosophy and prevent the spread of the other side's ideology. Then, after the wall came down and the Soviet Union broke up, international relations and global politics uh, became based more on how civilizations align and interact with each other. So, countries during the Cold War could be non aligned. Back then, it was a question of which side are you on? And now it's become post Cold War. It's more about who are you, right? So the question, which side are you on, has been replaced by who are you, meaning what is your cultural identity? So most civilizations are comprised of multiple countries. For example, Western Civ is made up of countries such as the United States, Canada, UK, France. Latin American civilization is includes countries such as Argentina, Mexico, Costa Rica, among others. African civilization includes, amongst others, South Africa and Uganda. Islamic civilization, Egypt, Morocco, Saudi Arabia, Iran. Cynic. Now, Cynic is China and a few other countries such as Korea and Hindu. You probably figure this one out is India. Could also have some of the smaller countries like Sri Lanka around there. Uh, Orthodox civilization comprises of Russia and Greece and some of the other countries in that region. Then you have Buddhist civilization, which is made up of most of the Southeast Asian countries like Cambodia and Thailand, but it's other countries also, including Mongolia. And Japanese civilization is unique because it's just Japan. Now, Huntington got a lot of stuff uh, correct in this book. He wrote this in the 90s, well before 9/11 happened, but he said that Islamic civilization would be a major threat to Western civilization. So that panned out. Huntington also predicted that China would work towards being a dominant power. And as you know, they're the dominant power in their region, and they're working today to become the dominant power worldwide. Huntington also discussed how the Ukraine is a rift country and it's kind of split between Ukrainian and Russian. And we see this playing out today. There's a potential for war to break out or Russia to invade Ukraine. But the fact of the matter is, there's a large population of Russians in certain areas within the Ukraine. And they've had elections in the past where a very pro Russian candidate got a large percentage of votes. Huntington also touched upon situation in Armenia and Azerbaijan, which I'm sure some of you know that a couple years ago that situation flared up again. It flared up right before the most secure election in the history of mankind happened, right? Anyways, another thing that Huntington talked about was immigration, and he was talking about how the situation with immigration in Europe and the U.S. It's very important that new immigrants into a country would be assimilated, and he talked about how in Europe doesn't have a good track record assimilating immigrants, whereas the U.S. does. But if you look in the last couple decades, you have leftists in the U.S. basically telling immigrants they don't have to assimilate. I mean, why would you assimilate into a country that's racist, right? So these leftists have been promoting both in Europe and in the U.S. To have unfettered immigration and don't assimilate. Just do whatever the hell you want. Maintain your culture and your ties to your previous country and your previous civilization. And, as we see that play out in the last couple decades, that's a recipe for disaster. So, another thing that Huntington discussed was two pictures of Western civilization, one as a dominant civilization around the globe, and then the other picture is a civilization in decline. So, Western civilization at the time he wrote the book was the only civilization with substantial interest in all other civilization or regions and the ability to affect the politics, economics, and security of other civilizations. He talked about how the West own and operate the international banking system, was the world's principal customer, and was militarily dominant. And the West had control of the sea lanes. Some of these things, to some extent, are still true, but less so now than it was in the 90s. The other picture of the West was a civilization in decline, which I don't think there's much dispute of this, right? Um, he talked about the share of the West political, economic, and military power is going down relative to other civilizations, which since then it's only become more true. And then he also mentioned a resurgence of non Western culture. So, looking closer at the decline of Western civilization and how things have only deteriorated worse since the 90s. You have economically, we had the crash in '08, not to mention the current economic situation isn't very strong. Moral decline, I think this is quite evident in Western Civ. You have the Chinese and many Islamic folks in other countries talk about the moral bankruptcy of the West. We got crime rates increasing. We have the decay of the family, which in large part is thanks to the Johnson administration and what they did with the welfare system, because since that got put into place, the unwed uh, childbirth rate has increased considerably. Huntington mentioned an indulgent society, which I think a lot of people would agree. Just some of the ridiculousness that goes on in media and social media these days is very indicative of an indulgent society. And he also mentioned cultural suicide. So many from the West today, basically say that the West, Europeans, Americans stole everything from everyone else. I think this is ridiculous, but it's very much in line with uh, the idea of cultural suicide. And then Huntington also talked about political disunity, which obviously things have only gotten worse since the 90s. I mean, supposedly the current administration in the U.S. is here to unite us all, but from what I could see, the things that this administration does and says only divides people worse. I don't think this country's been this heated of division since the Civil War. So, specifically in the United States, Huntington talked about national identity and how the U.S. national identity is founded on two things culturally, it's a heritage of Western civilization, and politically, it's the principles of the American Creed. And these principles are liberty, democracy, individualism, equality before the law, constitutionalism, and private property. And from my perspective, all of these things are increasingly being attacked by folks on the left. They try to say that they're doing things to protect our democracy and to protect it from some threat that it's imaginary boogeyman in their mind, right? These hordes of white nationalists and white supremacists. Anyways, Huntington and discussed how in the late 20th century, both of the elements of the American identity have been under, quote, concentrated and sustained onslaught from a small but influential number of intellectuals. In the name of multiculturalism, they have attacked the identification of the U.S. with Western civilization, denied existence of a common American culture, and promoted racial, ethnic, and other subnational cultural identities and groupings. And he was saying this back in the 90s. I mean, things are far worse now. So he talked about how back in the day, uh, politicians in the U.S. had a goal of unity, which is what this administration claims to be doing, but action speaks louder than words. But anyway, so he talked about how uh, the lefties have made diversity the goal. He talked about how diversity has been attempted in some other places before. He says, quote, the leaders of other countries have, at times, attempted to disavow their cultural heritage. In no case have they succeeded, and they have instead created schizophrenic, torn countries. So, this quote here, we could see this has come to fruition in the U.S. Huntington, he said that the multiculturalists seek to have people in the U.S. identify with many different civilizations. That goes back to the lack of assimilation with the immigration uh, situation that we have going on now. And, people can just come here from other places and don't identify with the country you chose to come to, right? That's what the leftists like. It doesn't make any sense to me unless you want to destroy this country. So Huntington says, quote, history shows that no country so constituted can long endure as a coherent society. A multi-civilizational United States will not be the United States. It will be the United Nations. So Huntington's talking about how these leftists are I mean, he didn't use the term leftist, but that's my term. But I mean, obviously, these leftists, they hate Western Civ. They substitute the rights of the individual, which, as you know, that's a huge foundation of the U.S., individual rights. So he says they substitute the rights of the individual with the rights of groups. So these different groups could be racial groups, ethnic groups, groups based on gender or sexual orientation. One last quote here from Huntington: rejection of the creed and of Western civilization means the end of the United States of America as we have known it. It also means effectively the end of Western civilization. So, I really enjoyed that book. I thought it was a very interesting read. It explains a lot, and the fact that he was able to call uh, very accurately the things with China and with Islam, and also with uh, dynamic here in the U.S. and these things with the U.S., the disunity, the multiculturalism, the lack of assimilation of immigrants. It's only gotten worse since he wrote this book, and I think it's something that people need to be aware of and concerned about. And hopefully, we can get this country back on the right track. Anyways, I think that's going to do it for me. If you like this video, go ahead and hit that thumbs up. If you like my other videos, please consider subscribing. Thank you, and I'm out.